The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of Iron Cage Combat Academy, Denver's most exclusive mixed martial arts training facility. The converted warehouse in the trendy Rhino district featured floor-to-ceiling windows, state-of-the-art equipment, and membership fees that started at $3,000 per month. Zuri Anderson pushed through the heavy glass doors at exactly 5:47 p.m., her worn Nike gym bag slung over one shoulder, her dark skin glistening with sweat. She wore simple black leggings and a faded gray tank top, her natural hair pulled back in a functional ponytail. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged solely by their appearance? If you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their skin color, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to show you that assumptions can be deadly. The moment Zuri stepped onto the training floor, conversations died. White male fighters in expensive Under Armour gear paused, hands moving toward their water bottles, creating barriers. A blonde woman in designer Lululemon took 2 steps backward, clutching her iPhone tighter. Victor Bennett, head trainer and former UFC middleweight contender, looked up from the heavy bag. His eyes tracked Zuri with the surveillance usually reserved for shoplifters. "Can we help you find something?" His tone suggested she was lost. "The Planet Fitness is 6 blocks that way. This is a professional training facility, members only." Zuri approached the front desk calmly. "I have a trial membership. Started yesterday." Kimberly, the receptionist, pulled up the computer with exaggerated slowness. "I'm not seeing a trial membership under..." "Zuri Anderson signed up online yesterday." "Online registrations require in-person verification," Victor interrupted, walking closer. At 6'2" and 220 pounds of muscle, he was used to physical intimidation working. "We have standards here. Can't just let anyone walk in off the street." His emphasis on anyone landed with the weight of exclusion. Zuri pulled out her phone, displaying the confirmation email. Victor barely glanced at it. "Email confirmations can be faked. Do you have actual ID?" "I have my driver's license." Victor took the ID, studying it theatrically, holding it up to the light. "Colorado license. Says here you're from Aurora." He said the neighborhood's name like it was a disease. "That's pretty far. Long way to come when there are cheaper options closer to your area." Travis Cooper, one of Victor's students, snorted. "Aurora? Isn't that where all those gang shootings happen?" He exchanged glances with Blake Morrison and Connor Hayes, creating an unconscious wall between Zuri and the equipment. "I can afford the membership," Zuri said simply. "The payment went through. I just want to train." Victor handed back her ID with reluctance. "You need to understand something about Iron Cage. This isn't some casual gym. We train serious fighters here, professional athletes. This requires discipline, respect, and a level of athleticism and training that..." He paused, eyes traveling from her worn sneakers to her tank top. "Not everyone possesses." Blake spoke up. "Have you ever been in a real fight, like trained fighting, not street brawls? Because there's a huge difference. There's discipline involved, not just swinging because you're angry." "I've trained," Zuri replied calmly. "YouTube videos don't count," Connor added with a laugh. "Neither do World Star compilations. You people always think natural athleticism is enough, but it's not. Real martial arts is about mastering yourself." The assumption hung in the air that black women were inherently violent, emotional, unable to master refined discipline, that any fighting ability came from the streets rather than dedication. Victor circled Zuri slowly. "You know what I think? I think you people see UFC on TV, see some fighters who look like you winning, and you think you can just walk into any gym and start throwing hands. But that's not how this works. Those fighters spent 10, 15, 20 years training. They studied under masters in Brazil, Thailand, Russia. They didn't just learn to fight in neighborhoods where fighting is part of survival. Around them, other members had stopped workouts. A white mother physically moved to the far side, clutching her gym bag. An older white man muttered, "This is exactly why membership standards matter. Let one in, Next thing you know, the whole place goes downhill. Someone else. Bet she can't even afford the monthly fees, probably using a stolen credit card. Zuri stood still, breathing controlled, despite every muscle wanting to demonstrate how wrong they were. I understand you have concerns, Zuri replied carefully. But my membership is paid, credentials verified, and I'm here to train. Access to equipment I've paid to use. Victor's expression shifted to something darker. An idea was forming, one that would entertain his clients while putting this intruder in her place. You want to train here? You want to prove you belong at Iron Cage? He gestured toward the sparring ring. Then let's see what you've got. Let's see if you people are as tough as you think you are when facing real trained fighters instead of whatever amateurs you've been rolling around with in your neighborhood gyms. Travis, Blake, and Connor exchanged excited glances. The prospect of publicly humiliating this woman was too entertaining to pass up. Victor, I don't think, Kimberly began, but Victor cut her off. No, she says she's trained. She says she belongs here, so let's verify that. Let's see if she can handle even 5 minutes in the ring with real martial artists. He turned back to Zuri, his smile cruel. Here's the deal, sweetheart. You spar with my boys here. Light contact, nothing crazy. If you can hold your own for 5 minutes without getting dropped, we'll honor your membership. Hell, I'll even waive your first month's fees. But when you fail, when you realize you're completely out of your depth, you leave quietly and don't come back. Deal. The challenge was impossible. Travis, Blake, and Connor were experienced amateur fighters, each outweighing Zuri by at least 50 pounds. I'm not interested in making a spectacle, Zuri said. I just want to use the heavy bags and train in peace. What's wrong? Victor's voice dripped with mock concern. Thought you people were tough? Always talking about how strong and resilient you are, how you don't back down. But when an actual challenge presents itself, suddenly you're scared. He turned to his students. This is what I'm talking about. All that street toughness disappears the second they're facing someone who actually knows what they're doing. Other members gathered, forming a circle. Phones appeared. Maya Rodriguez, a Latina kickboxer, positioned herself near the ring with her phone ready. 5 minutes, Victor repeated. That's all. Prove you belong here or leave. Unless you want to admit right now that you're in over your head, that maybe you don't belong in a gym like this, that maybe your people should stick to public facilities where the standards are more accessible. Blake leaned close to Travis and Connor, deliberately loud. $20 says she doesn't last 2 minutes before crying. I give her 90 seconds, Connor replied. You people talk a big game, but when it's time to perform. He made an exaggerated, crumbling gesture. Travis added, when she gets hurt, and she will, it's on her. She had every chance to walk away. Pride comes before the fall, especially for people like her who don't know their limitations. Zuri felt every eye. She saw Kimberly ready to call security. She saw Maya filming, determined to document this. She saw the wealthy white members watching this entertainment. And she saw Victor Bennett, who saw her dark skin and worn clothes and assumed she was nothing more than a delusional amateur. The discrimination had been building for 25 minutes, from the moment she walked into this ultimatum designed to destroy her dignity. You're making a mistake, Zuri said quietly. The only mistake, Victor shot back, stepping so close she could smell protein shake on his breath, is letting people who don't belong here think they have a right to access spaces that professionals have built. This is about maintaining standards, about keeping Iron Cage elite, about making sure that when someone walks through those doors, they've earned the right through years of dedication, not just because they paid a trial membership fee. He leaned down, invading her space. So what's it going to be? Prove you belong or get out, because I'm done wasting time on someone who's clearly out of her depth, someone who probably learned everything from watching parking lot fights and thinking that qualifies as training, Someone who doesn't understand that there's a hierarchy in this world and people like you don't get to just walk into places like this and demand equality. The crowd pressed closer. Phones glowed. Someone had started a timer. A white woman whispered, "I feel bad for her. She has no idea what she's gotten herself into." Her friend replied, "It's not our problem. She made her choice. Maybe she needs to learn not every space is for everyone." Travis shadowboxed. "Bet she doesn't even know how to throw a proper punch. That's how your kind fights, right? All aggression, no technique?" Blake stretched. $5 says she tries to pull hair or scratch when desperate. When people like her get cornered, they always resort to street fighting bullshit. Connor laughed. "Just remember, guys, go easy at first. We're not trying to hurt the poor thing. Just teach her a lesson about knowing her place." The casual dehumanization hung in the air. Every word, every gesture rooted in the same toxic belief. That black women were inherently inferior, inherently violent, inherently unwelcome in spaces white men had claimed. An older man called out, "Someone check if she signed a liability waiver. When she gets hurt, and she's definitely getting hurt, I don't want this gym getting sued. You people are always looking for paydays when things don't go your way." Zuri looked at the ring, then at Victor, then at the 3 men who'd volunteered to be instruments of her public degradation. She thought about walking away, about letting their racism stand unchallenged. But she'd spent too many years being underestimated, too many years having doors slammed in her face, too many years watching people make assumptions about her capabilities based solely on gender and skin color. "I'll spar," Zuri said. "But when I win, you apologize, publicly. To me and to every person who's ever walked into this gym and been judged by how they look instead of what they can do." Victor's laugh was ugly. "When you win? Sweetheart, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between confidence and delusion." He gestured toward the ring. "Travis, Blake, Connor, get warmed up. Let's show our guest what real training looks like." Zuri walked toward the locker room, every eye tracking her movements. She heard whispers, bets being placed, cruel speculation about how quickly she'd break. No one noticed the subtle shift in her posture. No one saw how her shoulders settled into perfect alignment, the unconscious adjustment of her stance into something far more refined. No one saw the small smile at the corner of her lips. And absolutely no one suspected they were about to witness the most spectacular 30 seconds in Iron Cage's history. Victor stood in the center of the ring, playing ringmaster. Kimberly held her phone high to capture what she assumed would be viral gold, a delusional woman getting put in her place. "Ground rules," Victor announced. "Light contact only. 3 rounds, 90 seconds each. Zuri gets fresh opponents each round. All she has to do is stay standing and not tap out. Should be simple, right?" Travis Cooper bounced on his toes, expensive Everlast gloves gleaming. At 6 feet and 190 pounds, he carried the confidence of someone who'd never lost to a woman. Zuri emerged from the locker room. She'd changed into simple black training shorts and a navy blue sports bra, her muscular frame now fully visible. But what caught attention wasn't her clothing. It was the way she moved. Her spine was perfectly aligned, her steps measured with the precision of someone who'd walked into fighting rings thousands of times before. Maya Rodriguez felt a chill. She'd been kickboxing for 7 years, and she recognized something in Zuri's movement that made her suddenly worried. But not for Zuri. Zuri climbed through the ropes accepting the training gloves. She didn't speak. Didn't make eye contact, just focused on securing the straps with practiced efficiency. "Last chance to back out," Victor offered, false concern fooling no one. Zuri looked at him then, her dark eyes holding his blue ones with such intensity that Victor took a half step backward before catching himself. "Ring the bell," Zuri said quietly. Victor grabbed the boxing bell, letting the moment build, making sure every phone was recording. Then he rang the bell. Travis Cooper rushed forward with overconfidence, throwing a textbook jab-cross combination that had worked perfectly in every sparring session. Zuri wasn't there. She'd slipped the jab with minimal head movement, let the cross pass inches from her face, and before Travis could register he'd missed, her counter right hand had already traveled the distance to his jaw. The sound of impact echoed like a gunshot. Travis Cooper's eyes rolled back, his knees buckled, his expensive mouthguard flew from his lips in a spray of saliva that caught the overhead lights. And then all 6 feet and 190 pounds of him collapsed to the canvas. 12 seconds had elapsed. The crowd stood frozen. This wasn't supposed to happen. But Travis Cooper lay unconscious with his limbs twitching. "Get up, Travis!" Victor commanded, his voice uncertain for the first time. "Get up!" But Travis wasn't getting up. Kimberly was already calling for the medical trainer. Blake and Connor stared at their fallen teammate, then at Zuri, who stood calmly in the center of the ring like she hadn't just knocked a man unconscious with a single punch. "That was lucky," Victor announced loudly, desperately trying to control the narrative. "He wasn't ready. Blake, get in there." Blake Morrison climbed through the ropes with considerably less confidence. His hands shook as he touched gloves with Zuri. "Use your reach advantage. Jab and move," Victor coached. The bell rang for round 2. Blake tried the strategy, throwing tentative jabs while circling left. But Zuri cut off the ring with footwork so economical it seemed effortless. Blake threw a jab she parried while closing distance. His follow-up left hook was predictable. Zuri ducked under it, stepped inside his guard, and delivered a liver shot with surgical precision. Blake's face went white. His mouth opened in a silent scream. His body folded. He dropped to his knees, then to his side, curling into a fetal position as his nervous system dealt with the overwhelming pain signal. 18 seconds. "This is insane," Maya Rodriguez said into her phone, her live stream now attracting thousands of viewers. "This woman is dismantling them." Connor Hayes stood outside the ring, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Connor," Victor started, but Connor was already shaking his head. "Fuck this, man. I'm not getting brain damage for $500 an hour." He backed away, hands raised in surrender. "That's not a beginner. I don't know who she is, but I'm not fighting her." Victor's face flushed red. His demonstration had collapsed in under 30 seconds. 2 of his best students lay on the canvas, one unconscious, one in fetal position, and the third had refused to step in. "Wait," Victor said, his voice cracking. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, typing rapidly into Google. Victor's face went from red to pale to sickly gray. His mouth opened and closed without sound. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What?" someone called out. "What did you find?" Victor looked up at Zuri, then back at his phone. His voice came out hoarse. You're Zuri the surgeon Anderson." The name hit the crowd like a physical force. Several people gasped audibly. "3-time world champion," Victor read, his voice barely above a whisper. "Olympic bronze medalist, 14 professional fights, 14 wins, 12 by knockout. Currently ranked number 2 pound-for-pound female fighter in the world." The silence was absolute. If you just witnessed the most satisfying moment of instant karma, hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because Zuri Anderson's journey is just beginning. Victor finally found his voice. "Ms. Anderson, we didn't know. If we had known who you were—" "If you had known I was famous," Zuri interrupted, her voice sharp, "then you would have treated me with respect. But a random black woman who just wants to work out? She doesn't deserve that same respect? Do you hear yourself?" She stepped through the ropes. The crowd parted like water. "I came here for one reason. I'd heard stories. Stories from other black women, from women of color, from anyone who didn't fit your narrow definition of who belongs in spaces like this. Stories about being followed, being questioned, being treated like criminals. And I wanted to see it for myself." She walked toward the exit. At the door, she turned back. "You failed the test. Every single one of you. You saw a black woman and made assumptions based on nothing but prejudice. You created an environment where I was presumed guilty, presumed incompetent, presumed unwelcome, and you did it so casually because you've probably been doing it your whole lives without consequence." Victor opened his mouth, but Zuri wasn't finished. "I'm sure by tomorrow you'll all be posting apologies on social media. But here's what I know. This didn't happen because you're uniquely terrible. This happens because this is how the system works. Black women, women of color, anyone who doesn't look like your ideal, we face this every single day. We're constantly forced to prove we belong in spaces that should be accessible to everyone." She pushed open the door, sunlight streaming in. "And when we do prove ourselves, when we knock out your champions, when we excel despite your discrimination, you act surprised. You act like we're the exception. But we're not. We're just the ones who didn't let your racism stop us." The door closed behind Zuri Anderson, leaving Iron Cage Combat Academy in stunned silence. 7 years earlier, Zuri Anderson had been on top of the world. At 23, she'd won her first World MMA Championship in Las Vegas. The Olympic bronze medal had come 2 years before. Her father, Marcus Anderson, had been a Navy SEAL who taught her discipline was everything. Her mother, Dr. Imani Anderson, was a sports medicine physician. Between them, Zuri received the perfect combination of physical training and medical knowledge. But success as a black woman meant something different. Every victory was questioned. She was naturally athletic instead of technically skilled. She won because of aggression instead of strategy. After her third world championship, Zuri retired. Not from injury, but from exhaustion. Exhausted from constant racism. Exhausted from having to be twice as good for half the recognition. Exhausted from sponsorship deals that went to white fighters with worse records. She'd traveled for 3 years. Thailand, Brazil, Russia, Japan. Training with masters with zero pressure to prove herself. For the first time since childhood, martial arts became something she did for herself. When she returned to Colorado, Zuri kept a low profile. She worked part-time as a self-defense instructor for women's shelters, taught kids at community centers. She wore simple clothes, drove a modest car, deliberately avoided markers of her former fame. But that anonymity came with a cost. Without success trappings, Zuri was just another black woman navigating spaces never designed to welcome people who looked like her. She'd been followed in stores, questioned in her own building, pulled over for matching a description. She'd applied for the Iron Cage trial membership specifically because she'd heard stories from other black women about the gym's discriminatory practices. Now, watching Victor's face drain of color, Zuri felt something shift. She was done being invisible. Done accepting discrimination with grace. Within 20 minutes, the video had been shared 10,000 times. By morning, over 2 million views across multiple platforms. The hashtags told the story. Iron Cage Racism. Zuri the Surgeon. Karma in the Ring. Victor Bennett woke to his phone exploding. Text messages from gym owners distancing themselves. Emails from members demanding refunds. Voicemails from sponsors terminating partnerships. Zuri hired civil rights attorney Simone Parker. Together, they filed a federal lawsuit against Iron Cage Combat Academy, Victor Bennett personally, and the parent company. The lawsuit detailed not just Zuri's experience, but a pattern of discrimination documented by dozens of other plaintiffs who came forward after seeing the viral video. The investigation expanded. The Colorado Civil Rights Division opened a broader inquiry into discrimination in high-end fitness facilities across Denver. They found a consistent pattern. People of color paid the same fees but received inferior service, faced constant questioning, and were made to feel unwelcome. Iron Cage's insurance company settled quickly, $2 million to Zuri, with an additional $500,000 for other victims. But Zuri's attorney pushed for more than money. She demanded structural changes, mandatory anti-discrimination training, diverse hiring practices, third-party audits, transparent complaint processes. Victor Bennett issued a lawyer-written apology full of passive voice and vague acknowledgments. But the damage was done. His reputation was destroyed. Elite fighters refused to train there. Wealthy clients left. Within 6 months, Iron Cage would file for bankruptcy. Travis, Blake, and Connor issued their own apologies, more genuine than their trainers. Connor's statement went viral for its raw honesty. "I spent years thinking I was open-minded. Then I watched myself on video treating a world champion like a criminal because of her skin color. I have to live with knowing I'm the person I always thought I wasn't." The Colorado legislature passed new regulations requiring fitness facilities to undergo regular anti-discrimination audits. The bill was nicknamed Zuri's Law. 3 weeks after the viral video, Zuri Anderson walked back through the doors of Iron Cage Combat Academy. But this time, everything was different. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer over her athletic wear, her Olympic bronze medal hanging prominently around her neck. Her attorney, Simone Parker, walked beside her, carrying a leather briefcase filled with settlement documents. Behind them, a news crew from ESPN followed, cameras rolling. The gym had new management. Victor Bennett was gone, fired by the parent company within 48 hours of the video going viral. In his place stood Karen Martinez, a former professional kickboxer and advocate for diversity in combat sports. She'd been hired specifically to rebuild the gym's reputation and culture. "Ms. Anderson," Karen said, extending her hand with genuine warmth. "Welcome back. We're honored to have you here." The transformation was visible everywhere. New signage proclaimed all athletes welcome in English and Spanish. Photographs of diverse fighters, men and women of all races, lined the walls where previously only white male champions had been displayed. The staff now included instructors of color, and the dress code policy that had been used to exclude people based on appearance had been eliminated. Zuri walked through the facility, cameras capturing every moment. The heavy bags she'd been denied access to. The ring where she'd knocked out Travis Cooper in 12 seconds. The locker room where she'd changed while hearing their cruel predictions about her failure. "This space caused me pain," Zuri said to the ESPN reporter, her voice steady but emotional. "But pain can be transformed into purpose. What happened here was wrong, but what happens next can be right." She turned to face the camera directly. Victor Bennett and his students saw a black woman and made assumptions. They created an environment where I was presumed incompetent, presumed criminal, presumed unwelcome. But their racism wasn't unique. It was systemic. And systemic problems require systemic solutions. The settlement agreement wasn't just about money. Zuri had demanded and received comprehensive changes. Every staff member had to complete 40 hours of anti-discrimination training. The gym implemented anonymous complaint systems where members could report discrimination without fear of retaliation. Quarterly diversity audits would be conducted by independent third parties. And perhaps most importantly, the gym established a scholarship program providing free memberships to low-income youth from communities of color. "I don't want revenge," Zuri continued. "I want change. I want black women, brown women, women of all backgrounds to walk into spaces like this and be treated with the dignity and respect they deserve, not because they're famous, not because they have credentials, but because they're human beings who paid for a service." Maya Rodriguez, the kickboxer who'd filmed the original incident, now worked at the gym as a diversity coordinator. She stood beside Zuri, emotional about the transformation she'd helped document and now facilitate. "When I started filming that day," Maya said, "I thought I was just documenting another instance of racism that would be ignored. I never imagined it would lead to this kind of change." Zuri didn't just stand up for herself, she stood up for all of us who've been made to feel like we don't belong. The news coverage sparked a national conversation. Other gyms across the country began implementing similar policies. The International Mixed Martial Arts Federation announced new standards for member facilities, requiring anti-discrimination training and diverse representation in leadership. But not everyone celebrated the changes. Victor Bennett sat in a leather chair across from his attorney, Gerald Morrison, in a downtown Denver office that smelled of expensive cologne and desperation. The view through the floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city stretching toward the mountains, but Victor wasn't looking at scenery. He was staring at the lawsuit documents spread across the mahogany desk. $2 million, Victor said, his voice hollow. Plus punitive damages, plus legal fees, plus your reputation, Gerald interrupted. Which, frankly, is worth more than the money. You can recover from financial loss. But what you did on camera to an Olympic medalist, he shook his head. That's permanent. The federal discrimination lawsuit was devastating in its detail. Simone Parker had done her homework. The complaint included not just Zuri's experience, but testimony from 43 other plaintiffs who'd experienced similar discrimination at Iron Cage over the past 5 years. Exhibit A. Email chains where Victor discussed implementing quality control measures that were thinly veiled racial profiling. He'd specifically instructed staff to watch members from certain zip codes, to verify their payment methods multiple times, to question their credentials more aggressively. Exhibit B. Security camera footage showing a pattern of behavior. White members greeted warmly, rarely questioned. Members of color, followed by staff, asked repeatedly to show membership cards, confronted about their presence. Exhibit C. Financial records showing that members of color paid the same fees but received shorter training sessions, less attention from instructors, and were systematically excluded from advanced classes regardless of skill level. Exhibit D. Text messages between Victor and his instructors using racial slurs and mocking members of color. Screenshots that would be entered into federal court record, preserved forever as evidence of his character. The insurance company wants to settle, Gerald said. They'll pay the $2 million to Zuri, the $500,000 fund for other victims, and cover the structural changes to the gym. But they won't cover punitive damages, which means that comes out of your personal assets. Victor's face went gray. How much are we talking? Judge Harrison is known for significant punitive awards in discrimination cases. Could be anywhere from $5 to $15 million. You'd have to liquidate everything. Your house, your cars, your retirement accounts. You'd be starting over at 47 years old with nothing. This is insane, Victor muttered. I was just trying to maintain standards. Keep the gym elite. It wasn't about race. Stop, Gerald cut him off sharply. Don't say another word, especially not with that reasoning. You're on video calling her you people. You questioned her credentials, assumed she was a criminal, and publicly humiliated her based explicitly on her race and gender. There is no defense here. None. The criminal charges added another layer of complexity. The Denver district attorney had filed charges of assault and civil rights violations. While Victor hadn't physically touched Zuri, he'd orchestrated a situation where 3 men attacked her in a ring under his supervision and authority. Colorado law recognized that as criminal conspiracy and ethnic intimidation. Worst case scenario, Gerald continued, you're looking at 3 to 5 years in prison. Best case, you plead down to probation, community service, and permanent loss of your training certifications. Travis Cooper, Blake Morrison, and Connor Hayes faced their own legal troubles. Each had been charged with assault and battery. Their attorneys had negotiated plea deals, suspended sentences, probation, mandatory counseling, and public apologies, but their lives had been fundamentally altered. Travis lost his job at a tech company after HR determined the viral video violated their code of conduct. Blake was expelled from his graduate program at the University of Denver. Connor's fiancée had broken off their engagement, telling him she couldn't marry someone capable of that kind of cruelty. The civil lawsuits against them personally were equally devastating. Zuri hadn't named them in her federal suit, but other victims had. The 3 men were defendants in multiple cases, facing hundreds of thousands in combined damages. Here's the reality, Gerald told Victor. You have 2 choices. Fight this in court, spend the next 3 years in litigation, drain every penny you have on legal fees, and probably lose anyway. Or settle now, accept responsibility, participate in the mandated reforms, and try to rebuild some semblance of a life. Victor looked at the settlement agreement. It required a public apology, not a lawyer-written statement, but a genuine video apology acknowledging what he'd done and why it was wrong. It required him to participate in anti-racism training and education. It required him to surrender his training certifications permanently. It required him to never work in the fitness or martial arts industry again in any capacity. "This is my life," Victor said quietly. "Fighting is all I know. Training people is who I am." "No," Gerald replied firmly. "Discriminating against people is who you were. The question is whether you want to become someone different or spend the rest of your life being defined by the worst thing you ever did." 6 months after the incident, the federal courthouse in downtown Denver became the stage for what legal analysts called one of the most significant civil rights trials in Colorado history. Judge Patricia Washington, a black woman with 30 years on the bench and a reputation for no-nonsense justice, presided over the proceedings. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the back rows. Advocacy groups sent representatives. And sitting in the gallery, wearing simple professional attire, was Zuri Anderson, no longer the victim in workout clothes, but a powerful woman ready to see justice served. Simone Parker stood to deliver her opening statement. She was a striking woman in her 50s, her silver hair worn natural, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fought discrimination cases for 3 decades. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Simone began, "this case is about a simple question. Do black women have the right to exist in public spaces without being presumed criminal, presumed incompetent, presumed unwelcome?" She walked to the evidence table, picking up a printed screenshot from the viral video. "This is Zuri Anderson being told she doesn't belong at a gym where she paid for membership. This is her being challenged to fight 3 men to prove she deserved access to equipment she already purchased. This is her being treated as less than human because of her skin color and gender." Simone projected the video on the courtroom screen. Even 6 months later, watching it was uncomfortable. Victor's voice echoed through the courtroom. "You people always think you can just walk into any gym." The casual cruelty, the racial assumptions, the public humiliation. "The defense will tell you this was about maintaining standards," Simone continued. "They'll say Victor Bennett was protecting his business, enforcing quality control, ensuring safety. But let me show you what standards really meant at Iron Cage Combat Academy." She pulled up emails, text messages, security footage. A pattern emerged that made several jurors visibly angry. White members greeted warmly, their credentials never questioned. Members of color treated as suspects, their every movement monitored, their presence challenged. "This wasn't about standards," Simone said, her voice rising with controlled passion. "This was about racism. Systematic, institutional, deliberate racism designed to keep certain people out of spaces that should be available to everyone who can pay for them." She turned to face the jury directly. "Zuri Anderson is an Olympic medalist, a 3-time world champion, one of the most skilled martial artists on the planet, and none of that should have mattered. She should have been treated with dignity and respect even if she'd never won a single fight, because she's a human being, because she paid for a membership, because discrimination is wrong regardless of the victim's credentials." The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Witness after witness took the stand, each describing similar experiences at Iron Cage. Marcus Thompson, a black software engineer, testified about being followed around the gym by staff, questioned about his membership 3 times in a single workout session, eventually told he made other members uncomfortable and should consider training elsewhere. Elena Rodriguez, a Latina attorney, described being asked repeatedly if she was sure she wanted to take advanced classes, told that women like her usually preferred the beginner groups, questioned about whether she could really afford the premium membership level. David Chen, an Asian American doctor, recounted being told he should try the karate gym down the street because Iron Cage specialized in different fighting styles, the staff assuming his ethnicity determined what martial arts he practiced. Each testimony built on the previous one, creating an undeniable pattern. This wasn't isolated incidents. This wasn't misunderstandings. This was policy, culture, deliberate discrimination woven into the fabric of how Iron Cage operated. Then Simone called Kimberly Walsh, the former receptionist, to the stand. Kimberly had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. She sat in the witness box looking smaller than she had in the viral video, her earlier confidence replaced with visible shame. "Ms. Walsh," Simone began, "can you describe the training you received when you started working at Iron Cage?" Kimberly's voice was quiet. "Victor gave me a list of red flags to watch for, things that indicated someone might not be a good fit for the gym." "What were these red flags?" "He said to pay attention to zip codes. If someone's address was in certain neighborhoods, I was supposed to verify their payment method multiple times, make sure the credit card wasn't stolen. He said people from those areas often tried to use the gym without proper authorization." "Were these neighborhoods primarily communities of color?" "Yes." "What else were you told?" Kimberly hesitated, then continued. "He said to watch how people dressed. If they didn't have expensive athletic wear, if they looked like they'd just come from work or from public transportation, I was supposed to question whether they could really afford the membership. He said we needed to maintain a certain image, attract a certain clientele." "Did he ever explicitly mention race?" "Not directly in the training, but in private conversations, yes. He'd say things like, 'We don't want this place turning into a Planet Fitness,' or 'We need to keep the quality up.' The implication was clear. He didn't want black and brown members." The defense attorney, Gerald Morrison, tried to salvage the situation during cross-examination. "Ms. Walsh, isn't it true that Iron Cage had several members of color?" "Yes, but—" "So, the gym wasn't excluding people based on race, was it?" "Not explicitly excluding, but making it very uncomfortable for them. The few members of color who stayed dealt with constant questioning, constant surveillance. Most people didn't renew after their initial membership expired." "But they were allowed to join initially, correct?" "Legally, yes, but the culture made it clear they weren't welcome." Gerald tried a different angle. "Isn't it possible that Mr. Bennett was simply trying to maintain safety standards? That he was concerned about liability, about ensuring members had appropriate training levels?" "Then why were white members never questioned about their training levels?" Kimberly shot back. "Why were their credentials accepted immediately while members of color had to prove themselves repeatedly?" The courtroom fell silent. Gerald had no response. The defense's case was weak, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Gerald Morrison had the unenviable task of defending the indefensible, trying to explain away hours of video evidence, dozens of witness testimonies, and Victor Bennett's own words caught on camera. Victor took the stand in his own defense, a decision Gerald had advised against but Victor had insisted upon. He wore a conservative suit, his earlier swagger completely gone, replaced by the defeated posture of a man who knew he'd already lost. "Mr. Bennett," Gerald began carefully, "can you explain what you were thinking on the day Ms. Anderson entered your gym?" Victor's voice was quiet. "I thought I was protecting my business. I'd built Iron Cage from nothing, created a space for serious athletes, and I was worried about maintaining that standard." "And when you saw Ms. Anderson, what concerned you?" "I didn't recognize her. She wasn't dressed like our typical members. She came from a neighborhood that—" He trailed off, realizing how bad this sounded. "That what?" Gerald prompted, trying to guide him through. "That wasn't typical for our clientele," Victor finished weakly. Simone Parker stood for cross-examination, and the entire courtroom sensed blood in the water. "Mr. Bennett, let me make sure I understand correctly. When you saw a black woman in modest athletic wear from a working-class neighborhood, you assumed she didn't belong at your gym. Is that accurate?" "It wasn't about race." "Mr. Bennett, I'm going to play a recording now. This is your voice from the incident. Please listen." The audio played through the courtroom speakers. "You people see UFC on TV and think you can just walk into any gym. Mr. Bennett, who did you mean by you people?" "I meant people who weren't experienced fighters." You didn't say inexperienced fighters. You said you people. Can you explain what you meant? Victor had no good answer. The courtroom waited in heavy silence. Simone continued relentlessly. Mr. Bennett, how many white women in workout clothes from working-class neighborhoods have you personally challenged to fight your students to prove they deserved membership access? None. How many white men? None. So this standard you claim to have been enforcing, you only applied it to black women. Is that correct? That's not... I didn't think of it that way. But that's what happened, isn't it? That's what the evidence shows. That's what 43 witnesses testified to. That's what your own words on video demonstrate. Victor had no response. His attorney looked defeated. The jury looked convinced. Judge Washington called a recess before closing arguments. When court resumed, Simone delivered a closing statement that would be quoted in civil rights courses for years to come. This case is about more than one woman's experience, Simone told the jury. It's about a pattern of discrimination that exists in thousands of spaces across this country. Gyms, stores, restaurants, workplaces, anywhere that black women and people of color try to access services they've paid for, spaces they have every right to occupy. Victor Bennett wasn't a rogue actor. He was a product of a system that teaches us certain people belong and others don't, that some bodies are welcome and others are suspicious, that white spaces must be protected from black and brown intrusion. But here's what Mr. Bennett didn't know. Zuri Anderson didn't need his permission to belong. She didn't need to prove herself to him. She already belonged because she's a human being with dignity and rights. The membership she paid for wasn't a favor. It was a transaction. She had every right to be there. Your verdict today sends a message about what kind of society we want to be. Do we accept discrimination as the price of doing business? Do we allow people like Victor Bennett to create hostile environments for people of color? Or do we say, clearly and unequivocally, that this behavior has consequences? The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood with the verdict form. On the count of federal civil rights violations, we find the defendant Victor Bennett guilty. The courtroom erupted. Advocates cheered. Journalists frantically typed updates. Victor Bennett dropped his head into his hands. Judge Washington's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order in this court!" When silence returned, the judge looked directly at Victor Bennett. "Mr. Bennett, you used your position of authority to humiliate and discriminate against Ms. Anderson and dozens of others. You created a hostile environment based on race and gender. You weaponized your business to enforce your personal prejudices. This court finds your actions reprehensible and worthy of significant punishment." She consulted her notes before pronouncing sentence. "You are hereby ordered to pay Ms. Anderson $2 million in compensatory damages. Additionally, you will pay $8 million in punitive damages to be distributed among the other plaintiffs. You will serve 3 years probation, during which you will complete 500 hours of community service in organizations serving communities of color. You will undergo comprehensive anti-racism training, and you are permanently barred from working in the fitness or martial arts industry in any capacity." Victor's face crumbled. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder as reality set in. Everything he'd built, everything he'd been, gone. If this moment of accountability moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Comment below. Would you have shown mercy in Zuri's position? Because the final chapter is about to reveal the true power of justice and transformation. Judge Washington wasn't finished. "Mr. Bennett, I want you to understand something. You didn't just hurt Ms. Anderson. You hurt every person of color who walked through your doors and felt unwelcome. You hurt every young black girl who might have pursued martial arts but assumed spaces like yours weren't for them. You hurt society by perpetuating the racism that keeps us divided." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But you also hurt yourself. You destroyed your own life through your prejudice. That's what racism does. It poisons everything it touches, including the racist. The gavel came down one final time. This court is adjourned. As the courtroom emptied, Zuri Anderson stood and walked toward the exit. Reporters swarmed, but she raised a hand for silence. Today, justice was served, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong in spaces they have every right to occupy. This verdict says clearly, discrimination has consequences. She looked directly at the camera. To every black woman, every woman of color, every person who's been made to feel less than, you belong. You always belonged. Don't let anyone's prejudice define your worth. With that, Zuri Anderson walked out of the courthouse, head held high, victorious not through violence but through the steady, relentless pursuit of justice. 5 years after the verdict, Zuri Anderson stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Colorado, addressing 200 students and faculty members who'd come to hear about her experience. The lecture hall buzzed with anticipation. This was the woman whose viral confrontation with racism had sparked a national conversation about discrimination in athletic spaces. That day at Iron Cage changed my life, Zuri told the audience, her voice steady and confident. But not in the way you might think. Yes, I won the lawsuit. Yes, Victor Bennett faced consequences. Yes, the gym transformed. But the real victory was what came after. What I chose to build from the ashes of that humiliation. She clicked to the next slide, showing photographs of the Anderson Athletic Foundation, her nonprofit organization providing free martial arts training to underserved youth across Colorado. The images showed diverse children in clean GIs practicing in well-equipped facilities, their faces bright with concentration and joy. We've trained over 3,000 kids in the past 5 years, Zuri continued. Most of them come from communities of color, from low-income families, from backgrounds where martial arts seemed inaccessible, a luxury for wealthy white kids, not something for them. We don't just teach them to fight. We teach them confidence, discipline, self-worth. We teach them that they belong in every space they choose to enter. The screen showed images of young black girls throwing perfect punches, their forms precise and powerful. Latino boys practicing kata with intense focus. A diverse group of teenagers sparring together, laughing, supporting each other regardless of race or background. These were the children Victor Bennett's worldview would have excluded. Victor Bennett spent his career excluding people who looked like these kids, Zuri said, her voice carrying both sadness and determination. I've spent the last 5 years including them. That's how you defeat racism, not just by punishing it, but by building something better in its place. The foundation operated in 12 locations across Colorado, from Denver to Colorado Springs, from Aurora to Pueblo. Each facility was staffed by diverse instructors, many of them former victims of discrimination who'd found their calling in teaching the next generation. The curriculum included not just martial arts techniques, but also lessons on self-advocacy, knowing your rights, and standing up against injustice. We teach these kids what I learned the hard way, Zuri explained, that your worth isn't determined by other people's prejudices, that you have the right to occupy space, to demand respect, to exist without justifying your presence. And we teach them practical skills, how to document discrimination, how to file complaints, how to seek justice when they're wronged. The foundation had become a pipeline for young fighters. 17 of Zuri's students had gone on to compete at national levels. 4 had earned college scholarships. 2 were training for the Olympics. But the real success stories were quieter. The shy girl who found her voice through martial arts, the bullied boy who learned to stand tall, the teenager from a rough neighborhood who discovered discipline could change his trajectory. Maya Rodriguez, who'd filmed the original confrontation, now served as the foundation's executive director. She sat in the front row of the auditorium, nodding along to Zuri's speech, her own journey of transformation evident in her professional confidence. When I pressed record on my phone that day, Maya had told reporters earlier, I was just trying to document injustice. I never imagined it would lead to this, an entire organization dedicated to making sure what happened to Zuri never happens to another kid. That's the power of speaking up, of refusing to let discrimination hide in the shadows. The foundation's impact extended beyond martial arts. It had become a community hub, offering tutoring, mentorship, college preparation workshops, and job training. Parents who dropped their kids off for martial arts classes stayed for financial literacy seminars or ESL courses. The spaces became gathering places where communities of color could feel safe, supported, and valued. People ask me if I've forgiven Victor Bennett, Zuri said, addressing the question that inevitably came up in every interview. Forgiveness is personal, and honestly, I'm still working through that. But what I can say is this: I refuse to let his racism define my life. I refuse to let that one evening of humiliation become my entire story. Instead, I took the pain he caused and transformed it into purpose. She clicked to a new slide showing the Foundation's expansion plans. New facilities in 5 additional states, partnerships with schools, a scholarship fund worth over $2 million. This is what victory looks like, Zuri said. Not just winning a lawsuit, not just destroying the career of a racist trainer, but building something lasting, something that will outlive all of us. These kids are my legacy. Their success, their confidence, their refusal to accept discrimination. That's what defeats racism in the long run. The audience erupted in applause. Students stood, many of them emotional, some wiping tears from their eyes. This wasn't just a story about confronting racism. It was a blueprint for transforming pain into power. During the question and answer session, a young black woman raised her hand. Ms. Anderson, I've experienced discrimination in athletic spaces too. I'm afraid to speak up because I don't have your credentials, your platform, your protection. What do you say to people like me? Zuri's response was immediate and passionate. You don't need credentials to deserve respect. You don't need to be an Olympic medalist to demand dignity. The fact that you're a human being who paid for a service is enough. Always document what happens. Video, audio, witnesses, file complaints. Don't let them silence you, and know that organizations like ours exist to support you. You're not alone. Connor Hayes attended the lecture, sitting in the back row where he hoped not to be noticed. The young man who'd mocked Zuri 5 years earlier looked different now, humbler, quieter, marked by the weight of his mistakes. After the lecture, he approached Zuri hesitantly. Ms. Anderson, I know I have no right to speak to you, Connor said, his voice thick with emotion. But I wanted you to know that I've volunteered at your foundation every weekend for the past 3 years, teaching kids, trying to make up for what I did. I can never undo the harm I caused, but I'm trying to do better. Zuri studied him for a long moment. Connor, accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about change. You've done the work. The hard, uncomfortable work of confronting your own racism and trying to be better. That matters. Keep doing it. Connor's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you. It's not kindness, Zuri replied. It's recognizing that people can change. That's the whole point of what we're building. A world where people don't just get canceled, but where they get the chance to transform if they're willing to do the work. Travis Cooper had taken a different path. After losing his job and facing public humiliation, he'd spiraled into depression and anger. He'd posted bitter screeds on social media about cancel culture and reverse racism, refusing to accept responsibility for his actions. His life remained a cautionary tale about what happens when people choose defensiveness over growth. Blake Morrison fell somewhere in between. He'd issued a genuine apology, participated in anti-racism training, but struggled to fully understand the depth of what he'd done. He'd moved to another state, started over with a new job, and generally kept his head down, not actively working to be better, but at least no longer actively causing harm. Victor Bennett, however, had disappeared entirely from public view. Bankrupt, disgraced, stripped of everything he'd built, he'd become a ghost story, the cautionary tale that organizations used in diversity training. Don't be like Victor Bennett had become shorthand for Don't let your racism destroy your life. 10 years after the incident, the transformation was complete. What had started as one viral video of discrimination had evolved into a national movement for accountability and change in athletic spaces. Summit Martial Arts, the renamed and restructured Iron Cage Combat Academy, had become the gold standard for inclusive fitness facilities. Their membership was 60% people of color, their staff reflected that diversity, and their culture had undergone a complete transformation. The walls that once displayed only white male champions now showcased fighters of all races, genders, and backgrounds. Karen Martinez, the new owner, had built Summit into a franchise with 12 locations across Colorado. Each facility operated under strict anti-discrimination policies, with zero tolerance for racial bias and comprehensive training for all staff members. "We don't just train fighters," Karen told a business magazine interviewing her about the gym's success. "We build community. We create spaces where everyone feels welcome regardless of their background, their appearance, or their bank account. And guess what? It's been incredibly profitable. Turns out, treating people with dignity is good for business." The story had become required reading in MBA programs as a case study in how discrimination damages brands and how inclusive practices drive success. Harvard Business School featured Summit Martial Arts in their curriculum, using it to demonstrate that diversity isn't just ethical, it's economically smart. Kimberly Walsh, the former receptionist who'd participated in Zuri's humiliation, had undergone her own transformation. After testifying against Victor Bennett, she'd been fired from Iron Cage but quickly hired by Summit Martial Arts as their diversity and inclusion coordinator. She used her experience, her complicity in discrimination, to train other staff members on recognizing and confronting bias. "I was part of the problem," Kimberly told new employees during orientation sessions. "I enforced Victor's racist policies because I wanted to fit in, because I didn't question authority, because I benefited from the same white privilege that excluded others. Understanding my role in that system was painful, but that pain motivated me to be better, to build something better." Her presentations included the viral video, forcing staff to watch her own participation in Zuri's humiliation. It was uncomfortable, raw, but effective. Seeing someone acknowledge their mistakes and commit to change had more impact than any corporate diversity training manual. The Colorado State Legislature had passed Zuri's law, comprehensive regulations requiring athletic facilities to undergo regular anti-discrimination audits, maintain transparent complaint processes, and demonstrate diverse hiring practices. The law had become a model for other states, with 15 states implementing similar regulations within 5 years. The International Mixed Martial Arts Federation adopted new standards for member facilities worldwide, directly inspired by Zuri's case. Gyms had to demonstrate compliance with anti-discrimination policies or risk losing their accreditation. But perhaps the most significant legacy was the thousands of young people who'd been inspired by Zuri's story. Applications to martial arts programs from girls of color had increased 300% nationally. Young black women cited Zuri as their inspiration for pursuing combat sports, for refusing to accept spaces that excluded them, for demanding the respect they deserved. Social media was filled with videos of young fighters dedicating their victories to Zuri Anderson. For Zuri became a hashtag celebrating achievements in the face of discrimination. Athletes of color across all sports referenced her story when confronting racism in their own fields. The Anderson Athletic Foundation had expanded beyond Colorado, operating in 12 states with plans for national coverage. Over 10,000 children had graduated from their programs, learning not just martial arts but also self-advocacy, community organizing, and social justice. The Foundation's scholarship program had sent 127 students to college, many of them the first in their families to pursue higher education. The ripple effects extended through entire communities, educated young people returning home to teach, to mentor, to transform the neighborhoods that had shaped them. Maya Rodriguez had written a book about her experience filming the confrontation and building the foundation. Witnessing Justice, How One Video Changed Everything became a bestseller used in sociology courses and diversity training programs across the country. What I learned, Maya wrote in the book's conclusion, is that documentation matters. Recording injustice isn't enough. You have to do something with that evidence. You have to turn witnessing into action, observation into intervention, awareness into change. That's what Zuri taught me. That's what she taught all of us. The original video had been viewed over 50 million times. It had been analyzed in academic papers, referenced in Supreme Court briefs about discrimination, and shown in countless classrooms as an example of systemic racism in action. But more importantly, it had changed real lives. Not just Zuri's, not just Victor Bennett's, but thousands of people who'd seen the video and recognized themselves, either as victims who'd experienced similar discrimination or as perpetrators who'd never considered how their actions affected others. Travis Cooper's mother had watched the video and recognized her son's cruelty. She'd forced him into therapy, into confronting the racism she'd unwittingly taught him through a lifetime of subtle biases and unexamined prejudices. Their relationship remained strained, but at least she'd tried to intervene, to break the cycle. Blake Morrison's college professor had shown the video in class, leading to a painful but necessary conversation about Blake's participation. That moment of public accountability had been the catalyst for his genuine, if imperfect, attempts at growth. Even people who'd never met Zuri, never set foot in Iron Cage, never practiced martial arts, they'd been affected by her story. Parents had difficult conversations with their children about racism. Teachers incorporated the incident into lesson plans. Employers revised their anti-discrimination policies. The case had created jurisprudence, setting legal precedents about hostile environments in athletic spaces, about the liability of facility owners for discriminatory conduct, about the standards for proving systemic racism in civil rights cases. 10 years later, law students studied Anderson v. Iron Cage Combat Academy in their civil rights courses, analyzing how the case had strengthened protections against discrimination and expanded the definition of hostile environments. 10 years after that Friday evening in May, Zuri Anderson returned to the building that had once been Iron Cage Combat Academy. Summit Martial Arts was hosting a youth championship tournament, and Zuri was the guest of honor. The facility was unrecognizable from the space that had rejected her a decade earlier. Where once sterile white walls had displayed only white male champions, now vibrant murals celebrated diverse fighters from around the world. The equipment was state-of-the-art but accessible, with programs at every price point to ensure economic barriers didn't exclude talented athletes. She watched young fighters, Black, white, Asian, Latino, Indigenous, competing with respect and skill. She saw parents cheering without regard to their children's opponents' races. She saw instructors of all backgrounds teaching students of all backgrounds, creating the kind of inclusive environment she'd fought so hard to make possible. "This is what I fought for," Zuri said to the ESPN reporter documenting the anniversary. "Not revenge, not destruction, transformation, proof that spaces can change, that culture can evolve, that justice isn't just punishment, it's possibility. Look at these kids. They have no idea that 10 years ago, many of them wouldn't have been welcome here. They just assume they belong, and they're right." The reporter asked the question that everyone wanted answered. "Do you ever think about Victor Bennett? About what happened to him?" Zuri paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think about him sometimes, not with satisfaction, not with vindictiveness, mostly with sadness. He destroyed his own life through his racism. He could have been part of this." She gestured at the thriving, diverse gym around them. "But he chose exclusion over inclusion. He chose prejudice over possibility, and that choice cost him everything." She continued, her voice thoughtful. "But here's what I've learned. Focusing on Victor Bennett gives him too much power in this story. This isn't about him anymore. It's about every kid in this building who's learning they deserve respect. It's about every Black woman who walks into an athletic space with her head held high because she knows discrimination has consequences. It's about building the world we want, rather than just tearing down the world we don't want. A young black girl approached shyly, holding out a photograph for an autograph. She looked about 12, wearing a GI with a green belt tied carefully around her waist. "Ms. Anderson, I saw your video in school. My teacher said you changed everything. Is that true?" Zuri knelt down to the girl's level, bringing herself to eye contact. "I didn't change everything, sweetheart. But I changed something. And when enough people change something, when enough people refuse to accept discrimination, when enough people stand up and say, 'This is wrong,' eventually, everything changes. You understand?" The girl nodded solemnly, her eyes wide with understanding beyond her years. "Good. Now show me your stance. Let's see if you've been training right." The girl dropped into a perfect fighting stance, balanced, centered, confident. Her weight was distributed correctly, her hands positioned for both offense and defense, her posture radiating the kind of self-assurance that comes from good training and supportive environments. "Beautiful," Zuri said, smiling warmly. "Absolutely beautiful. You belong here. You belong in any space you choose to enter. Remember that. You always belong. Don't let anyone ever make you feel otherwise." The girl beamed, running back to her mother who stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. The mother mouthed, "Thank you," to Zuri, and in that simple exchange was everything Zuri had fought for. A young black girl who would grow up knowing her worth, who would never accept discrimination as inevitable, who would demand respect as her birthright. As the tournament began, Zuri took her seat in the place of honor. The young fighters competed with skill and sportsmanship, their techniques reflecting excellent training and their attitudes reflecting the inclusive culture that had replaced Victor Bennett's toxic environment. Between matches, Zuri reflected on the journey. From humiliation to vindication, from pain to purpose, from victim to victor, not through violence, but through the steady, patient work of building something better. She thought about the 3,000 children who'd trained at her foundation, the 17 states that had passed anti-discrimination laws inspired by her case, the countless young women of color who'd pursued martial arts because they'd seen someone who looked like them refuse to accept exclusion. She thought about Connor Hayes, who'd spent 5 years volunteering to atone for one evening of cruelty. About Maya Rodriguez, who'd transformed witnessing into advocacy. About Kimberly Walsh, who'd turned complicity into commitment to change. She thought about the community that had rallied around her, the attorney who'd taken her case, the judge who'd delivered justice, the media that had amplified her story, the everyday people who'd said, "This is wrong," and demanded accountability. And she thought about every person who'd watched that viral video and made a choice to examine their own biases, to speak up against discrimination, to create more inclusive spaces in their own spheres of influence. That was the real victory. Not the money from the settlement, not the destruction of Victor Bennett's career, not even the transformation of one gym. The real victory was the cultural shift, the collective commitment to doing better, the thousands of small actions that added up to meaningful change. The tournament concluded with Zuri presenting the championship trophy to a young Latina girl who'd fought with extraordinary skill and heart. As the girl raised the trophy above her head, her family cheering wildly in the stands, Zuri felt the weight of the decade lift from her shoulders. This was why she'd fought. This was why she'd endured the humiliation, the lawsuit, the public scrutiny, the painful process of turning trauma into testimony, so that this girl and thousands like her would grow up in a world where their presence in athletic spaces wasn't questioned, where their capabilities weren't doubted, where their humanity wasn't conditional. What's your view about this story? If you were in Zuri's shoes, would you have had the grace to turn pain into purpose? Would you have built something positive from discrimination, or would you have chosen a different path? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that justice is real and transformation is possible, hit that subscribe button for more true stories of racial justice, accountability, and redemption. Smash the like button if you believe racists should face consequences, but that change is possible. Share this story with someone who needs to see that discrimination has a price, but that pain can become purpose. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments. We want to know how this story resonated with people around the world. Remember, assumptions about people based on appearance are the fastest way to destroy your own credibility. Respect costs nothing, but prejudice costs everything. And when we choose to build rather than just tear down, when we choose transformation over revenge, when we choose purpose over pain, that's when real, lasting change becomes possible. Justice is blind, but she sees everything.